And we are live. So, Jennifer Reeder, welcome back to Utah Valley University.
Thank you so much.
We have a crowd here. Can you give her a round of applause, people? The way we do this is you and I talk like this. We're kind of set up on a desktop so that we aren't using Wi-Fi, and then they'll come up and ask questions. I'm going to ask a few first.
Okay.
First off, though, it's 4:30 in the morning there, or something like that. What? What? Tell us what you tell us what you're doing in Poland.
Only for you, Duane.
Oh, you're so sweet. You're so sweet.
So yeah, I'm in Warsaw, Poland. I'm here doing the color grading. You guys are making me cry. No, I'm doing the color grading and the visual effects for my new feature-length film that I shot this summer right before I came to visit you guys in Utah to do the film project. But it's a feature-length, but it went to this really awesome festival called the American Film Festival in Wrocław, Poland, where they have. I mean, it's a totally professional giant festival where they only feature American films, but they have a section that's a work in progress where they invite usually less than a handful of films that have been shot that are, in some stage of post-production. And it's a competition, and I won basically the grand prize, which is like full color grading, visual effects, and I won a sound design package. But since the film is like so like American, like there's a high school football game, and it takes place in an American high school, and it's like a lot of stuff outside in the Midwest. We sort of thought that it was probably best to do the sound design in the States. But I'm here until Saturday, to do the color grading and the VFX here in Warsaw.
Oh, what a trip. That's so great.
Yeah.
And I've had
but Signature Move, I mean, it's sort of related because, Signature Move won a whole post-production package in Mexico City. So
wow.
Somehow I so far in terms of feature films, I just can't do post-production in the States.
Well, it's like a cool opportunity, just an excuse to be in Poland.
Yeah.
In December, which I imagine is perfect time to be in Poland.
Yeah, it's chilly, but it's like Chicago. Chicago's chilly too, and actually, there's a lot of Polish people in Chicago, so I feel right at home.
Yeah.
Except for the time change.
Right. Yeah, we're freezing here too right now. In fact, I'm bundled up. I've got my Chicago shirt on though.
Nice. Yes, good, nice. Represent.
So great to see you. I have some questions, and hopefully these guys have questions. The better. And so I'm going to start because I've seen a lot of shorts, and even with them, it was sort of connected to some of your shorts. And you mentioned how your feature you're working on right now has sort of some relation to some of your shorts. I feel like, in a way, Signature Move feels a little bit out of left field in a way. Can you talk about, and it's your first feature, can you talk about the choice to make this film and how sort of stylistically maybe it's a little different, and why it happened or how it happened, which might be the exact same thing. So.
Sure. So it's the first feature film or the first film ever that I directed that I didn't write. So the film was written by Fawzia Mirza, who plays Zainab, and another woman, Lisa Donato. So they wrote it, and Fawzia now lives in Los Angeles, but at the time she was living in Chicago, and she and I were friends. I mean, sort of very much like her character in the film. She's an extremely dynamic person. In her real life, she used to be a lawyer. She started taking acting classes to be a better lawyer and realized that she wanted to be an actor. She's always been an activist. And when she became an actor, she realized that there were very few parts for sort of like short brown lesbians who are also identify as, Muslim.
Right.
And so she started writing her own really funny little kind of like web, like sketch comedy stuff, like shorts. And then she wanted to make, a feature film like a lot of people do. And so she wrote Signature Move with her friend Lisa. And it's basically autobiographical about like how Fawzia fell in love one hot summer in Chicago with a Mexican woman. And they realized that they had a lot in common in terms of their relationships with their mother, their relationships with their culture, with their religion, and navigating the sort of authenticity of their life through, while still maintaining a very close relationship to their culture, to their religion, to their family. And neither Fawzia nor Lisa wanted to direct it. And so they asked me if I wanted to direct it. They were looking for a female director in Chicago. And sadly, there's not a lot to choose from. I mean, I'm not saying there's just me, but, there might be just me and one, Chris Swanberg or something like this. So they asked me to do it. I mean, I think partially because Fawzia positioned this film kind of like a coming of age, I mean, her character, even though she's an adult, is kind of having a kind of a coming of age experience. And I really wasn't sure I was the right person to direct this, like I'm not Muslim, I'm not Mexican, I'm not a third culture kid, meaning, my parents were, like they were born in the US, etc. But I knew this was a super important story to tell. It just felt like really timely in terms of thinking about the migrant experience and thinking about, women's issues, and thinking literally about, 2 years ago, Mexicans and Muslims and how, at that time and still sadly now, the current administration has a way of dealing with Mexicans and dealing with Muslims in a way that feels not very, loving or inclusive. So I just thought, wow, like, I'm not sure this is,
way to put it.
yeah, I just, so I just thought, like, I'm not sure I'm the right person to tell this story, but I don't want anyone else to do it. I really want to try to be part of this thing. I want to be a person who is part of this film that I had a sense would be very impactful for a lot of people, for maybe people who had never seen themselves represented in a film before, for even like people who, or even, I mean, it's a romantic comedy, and truly there are like very few romantic comedies about, Muslims or lesbians or lady wrestlers, etc. But true, it's very, very different from the films that I have made. Like I said, it's a romantic comedy. It's about all adults. There's not some sort of dark underpinning. There's no kind of dead body that kind of floats to the surface at some point, So it was a really interesting, experience. But I am so thankful that, and it world premiered at South by Southwest. Like this super, robust festival, like, and it toured all around the world. I mean, it screened back in Mumbai, it screened in Mexico, it screened all over the world at lots and lots and lots of LGBTQ festivals, but also lots of mainstream festivals. And, in a time where I truly believe that, at the end of the day, art and culture will save us. I think if you're in sort of strange times globally, art and culture still has a lot of agency for the soul. And so this is a film that I think is that kind of, antidote to sort of some of the weirdness in the world.
It's interesting because the last film we screened was for CineSkype was Sydney Freeland's Deirdre and Laney Rob a Train.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know Sydney?
I don't know Sydney, but I know the film.
Well, anyway, it's another film that deals with, it's a mixed race family, and it's just so the idea. Can you talk a little bit from your experience with this film about that importance of people seeing themselves represented?
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that actually I do feel like it comes from what I've dealt with in my own films is, whether it's just strictly about like making films that are all about female experiences, or then, in my films, I've often cast a really wide array of different sort of races and ethnicities and cultures, because, you know, it's like the personal is political. And I understand also, as, you know, being an educator, showing a certain film in class, like for instance, the first time I showed Pariah, the Dee Reese film, which is a beautiful film, to a class of young screenwriters, and a lot, over half who were African American. It was like this, that's not a film that they would have found on their own, you know, because it's this kind of like small little indie film. But knowing that like there was this connection, they were like, oh, I see myself in that film, and that's so validating. You know, that's life. It's not just a class. You know, it's not just watching a film. Whoa. Can you? I feel like I lost you. Okay, fine. It said they were waiting for other people to join the call.
What's really weird is that we're still like connected via live, so I think we'll just have this like big black.
Well, so I'll say, yeah. So it you know, making this film that truly, I mean, when we would Fozzie and I toured with the film a lot, and we had some audiences that were like packed with South Asian people who just wanted to see Shabana Azmi, who's this Bollywood legend, you know, and nobody stormed out over the content. You know, everybody stayed, and we had these beautiful conversations about this American rom-com that was in Urdu and Spanish and in English. It felt really important to kind of represent how people talk at home with their families. Right. And it felt really, yeah, right. And it felt also really important to, you know, to represent, you know, a kind of a Muslim household, and to represent a Muslim woman in both Parveen and Zainab, neither of whom were oppressed or victimized. You know, they were actually kind of living their lives, and also it felt important to represent, you know, another mother-daughter relationship where it's actually, you know, really open. And even though, you know, maybe Alma's mother, as, you know, maybe like a Mexican Catholic woman, doesn't love, you know, the idea that her daughter will never find, you know, a nice Mexican man to marry. She still loves her daughter, and that felt actually really important. It was like a no-brainer to sort of like make a film that just really connected to people. And we felt that, you know, in audiences like all over the world, you know, when the lights would go up and people just were like, yeah, that was me. And it's really, that was a super important moment to realize that, you know, millions and millions of people who consume films. No, keep going. It's fine.
I have to turn on the
okay, that's
computer,
okay.
But it makes the noise only 3 minutes.
No problem. The guy's getting set up for breakfast.
You're in a restaurant or a cafe?
I'm in the lobby of the hotel. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it was like it felt like really, you know, beautifully, you know, important to make a film that, you know, that spoke to people, and to just acknowledge the fact that a lot of people watch films and they themselves, you know, never see, I mean, themselves in a film at all, but they still love films. They love film culture. And it's just the smallest gesture to sort of say, to cast your film, or to tell a story that maybe is different from yours. Do your research, don't make assumptions, be authentic, and all of that stuff. But the payoff is just astonishing.
Thank you. If you guys, I've got one more question. If you guys want to come up, so that there's not a lag. If you have a question, please line up here. Tell us a bit about production, about how far you went. I mean, how long you went, how long the production was. I imagine you were shooting on a real low budget, but it doesn't feel particularly like, it doesn't feel grungy or it doesn't feel
Janky.
yeah, no, skanky isn't what I'm looking for.
No, janky, not skanky. But like kind of, yeah, rigged to, like sort of like, you know, jerry rigged together.
I'm blanking on the term. It doesn't feel oh, geez, like Schwanberg's movies. What's the term? Yeah,
like it's not. Yeah.
Mumblecore.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, obviously we shot from a script that Fazia and Lisa wrote, and we shot over 17 days. So it wasn't like a super grueling production. I mean, they were, you know, full 12-hour days, but it was, you know, 17 days all over Chicago. You know, the best part about shooting in a place like Chicago is that it's still, want to shoot a film, so you can kind of call in all the favors, right? Which is probably not that dissimilar from, you know, sort of sometimes shooting where you are, right? So if you say to the guy down the street who has a grocery store, you know, can we shoot in your grocery store? You know, they say, yeah, sure, that would be lovely. I'd love to be part of this project, as opposed to saying like, yeah, here's the location fee and where's your insurance, and, you know, we're going to make it as hard as possible, blah, blah, blah. So we had a shoestring budget, but we knew that we wanted it to not look like it was made on a shoestring. So, you know, we shot with an Alexa, and we called in all the favors, and we shot in authentically up on in Rogers Park, which is densely South Asian. You know, got all of those aunties involved. Then we shot in Pilsen, a little village which is densely Mexican, you know, got all those aunties involved, you know, and everybody was, you know, strangers would come to set in both neighborhoods with like trays of samosas or trays of tacos to kind of like help the crew out. You know, it was like a whole neighborhood family affair. But I think it's one of those films that, and this is sort of my principle, you know, in general, is that you have to be, you know, be a nice person, be a good human, and at the end of the day, when you're making a film, all of that stuff will come back to you, because, you know, people remember that you are nice, and crews will come back and work for you, and they'll put in an extra hour if you have to. You know, shop owners will help you out. The city, I mean, Chicago is notoriously hard to shoot around. It's a union city, and, you know, so we because the producers they have a good relationship with the city. They own a magazine that does like lots of cultural reviews in the city, and so they also called in favors, and so we had kind of unprecedented access to downtown, the big Millennium Park. So we shot down there, and yeah, so it was a tiny budget, but we sort of made that stretch by, you know, being nice and calling in favors, and shooting in neighborhoods in Chicago that are almost rarely represented cinematically. You know, so, you know, we didn't go to, you know, Soldier Field. We didn't go to Wrigleyville. You know, we were shooting in neighborhoods that are very authentically Chicago. You know, Chicago's a very culturally rich city, and that's almost never represented on film.
Right. You see like the dozen or so key places over and over again whenever you.
Yeah. Right.
Excellent. Anyone with questions? Come on up.
Or complaints, even.
Yeah, just rip into it. So say your name, and you can adjust the camera if you're tall or short. They tend to not line up by height.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Makita Rudd, and I'm a digital cinema student here. And you said something a second ago, sort of about how, like, clearly the characters in this movie are extremely diverse. And so I think, you know, there's a lack of movies out there that are like this one, that display diverse characters in just kind of like a, you know, everyday light. It's not, you know, super in your face about anything. You know, it just presents these characters with just a very like interesting story and a complex relationship while being, you know, it gets dramatic at parts, but it doesn't ever get too like, you know, I want to word it correctly, but it just doesn't get too like
heavy, maybe.
Heavy, yeah, and it doesn't go to some of the places that maybe movies like this feel like they sort of have a greater obligation to go, and I think that that's really cool and really like an interesting way to portray these diverse characters in a movie, because you don't see that very often. So I was just wondering, like, how much was that in your mind when you were thinking about directing this movie, and then while you were directing the movie?
Yeah, so that had a lot to do with, you know, like I said, Fawzia, who wrote it, who herself identifies as a Pakistani Muslim lesbian. So it's very much about her story, and I know that she it's about her as a person, or her, you know, people like her just as a human navigating their day-to-day life, you know, just trying to, you know, have a job and take care of a mother, deal with a, you know, a passed away father, falling in love, you know, not being very good at falling in love, not being very good at wrestling, etc. You know, and so that really that appealed to me a lot, because those are universal. That's universal. You know, that's really about the human condition. I mean, like I said before, I'm not, you know, I'm not at all, you know, Pakistani or Muslim. So I was like, wow, how do I portray that? But I, you know, am a person who, you know, has a mom. My father also passed away like Fawzia, so we sort of had that in common. I'm taking care of my mother now too. You know, I've had to negotiate, you know, work and love and life, and those felt like, yeah, who doesn't want to make a film that's just about the, or like even like a sort of a funny movie about the kind of human condition. And also really a film about what it means to sort of be an American right now, you know, that is, or to live in America right now, which really is, you know, about navigating, you know, like several different kind of identities. And yeah, it felt like if it was much more, if it had been a film that was too involved in terms of those identity politics, I think it would have been too much for me. I sort of would have been over my head in terms of representing cultures and identities that are so far from my own. But because it was really about just a human experience, it felt like something that I very much could relate to.
Awesome. And I have one more thing, and it's kind of like super minute, but there was a moment in the movie when the mom is sitting on the couch and she comes home, and the mom's hand goes to her watch, and she looks out the window. And I just thought, I don't know, I was wondering if that was a piece of direction or if the actress just did that, because I thought it was like a very, I don't know, it's just like, you know, she didn't have to look at it. It was like very subliminal, her looking out the window at the sun's coming up and putting her hand on her watch.
Yeah, so the actress that plays Parveen, like I had mentioned, Shabana Azmi, and she is, you know, like she lives in Mumbai. She's a Bollywood legend. She's like the Meryl Streep of India, truly. And so we never had to give her like too much direction. Her instincts as an actress were just, you know, sublime. And so in that moment, we wanted her to acknowledge that she also had some secrets, you know, so that character doesn't very often talk about grieving the loss of her husband, you know, the love of her life. But we as the audience know that the previous night, you know, when she was looking for something to sew up the hole in her headscarf, she found her husband's watch and she put it on, and then she put the lipstick on. And so it was a moment when, like when the daughter comes home in that kind of walk of shame sort of moment, coming back into the house after being out all night, you know, and we said to, you know, Shabana, sort of have this moment where you know, we know that your character also has secrets that they're not revealing, you know, or things that your character is sort of keeping close to her heart. And so it was a little bit of both. It was sort of some direction, but I certainly didn't say, you know, on this beat, touch the watch and look out the window. You know, like her instincts as an actress and sort of like feeling that character, really, it was like that sort of instinct of touching the watch and acknowledging that was her dead husband's watch and that she was grieving, and that, you know, that sort of look out the window is just that moment of where we know that she's having a very genuine emotional reaction to the loss of her husband, but she's not able to articulate that yet, you know, which is a part of grief.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was a cool moment. So
thanks.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm JoJo. I don't know if you remember me.
I know you. Wait till I'm JoJo.
So my first question kind of piggybacks off of his last question about, like, because I really appreciated how organic the feel of like the culture and everything, how it was just very naturally revealing, as opposed to being like, she's Muslim and she's a lesbian, and just being like very like in your face. And so I was just kind of wondering, like, as a director, and especially as somebody who is not necessarily part of those cultures, how much research or how much time did you have to spend doing some research until you felt like you were kind of ready to kind of start exploring those cultures?
Yeah, so I mean, that was the sort of best part about having Fawzia be one of the writers, you know, and she was in the film as well, and it was basically like her story, you know. So anytime I had a question, I could just ask her directly. So there were a couple things. I mean, my relationship with my mother is much more like the relationship with Alma. I tell her everything. I always have, and so my relationship with my mother is very, very, very open. So it was hard for me. What was hard for me at the beginning was trying to figure out the relationship between Zanab and her mother. But that's actually also identical to the relationship in real life with Fawzia and her mother. Fawzia and her mother are actually very, very close. They almost never talk about their personal life, you know? And at first I just couldn't understand. Those two things didn't make sense to me. But through many, many conversations, she said that's actually a lot about certain aspects of, for her, it was a lot about South Asian culture. And I think it actually has to do with a lot of different, you know, cultures where you can be very, very close to your family members, but maybe they know what is going on in your personal life, but they do not want to talk about it, you know? And that's okay. It doesn't mean that not talking about your personal life to your family means that your personal life doesn't exist to them. And that was something that I was like, oh, okay. Like, your family can non-verbally acknowledge, you know, your personal life, and that can still feel validating without sort of saying it out loud, you know? And so that sort of realization was really meaningful to me. And she also said, you know, we went back and forth a lot in the script writing stage about whether or not a very definitive, like, coming out moment for Zanab's character. And we decided against it. You know, it was actually really important that we wrote a film with queer content where the climax of the film was not about coming out, you know, and we wanted to acknowledge that coming out is very personal, and that there's no sort of like there's no prescribed way to come out to your family, you know. And so we wanted to also make a film that sort of said to people, you know, that it's like coming out is really personal, and it can be very subtle, it can be very nonverbal, it can take decades, you know. A verbal coming out might never happen, and that's okay. So, you know, even though this is a romantic comedy, I think that those aspects of, like, the family dynamic are really complicated, you know, and something that it took me as the director, like, a long time to kind of wrap my head around, because it was not my own personal experience. But at the end of the day, it's something that we realized, you know, showing it to you know, sometimes a totally packed crowd, like of lots of, you know, lesbians who have very different experiences coming out of their families, or lots of South Asians, or lots of Mexicans, or a combination of all those people, that aspect in particular of how one navigates their personal life with their family was, and how we dealt with it really subtly, but acknowledged that it's complicated and personal. You know, people saying like, yeah, thank you for that, you know, was super, super, super meaningful. So I think that, you know, if you're going to take on a project that involves people that are not like you, it just, you know, you have to ask questions and make zero assumptions. And, you know, we worked with a really great, you know, production design team who, you know, basically looked at pictures of like Fawzia's mother's own house. You know, Fawzia's mother lives in Fort Wayne. She's like Midwestern, you know, Muslim mom. So it's a combination of weird, you know, Indiana tchotchkes, but also kind of like stuff that she's kind of maintained from like when she came over from Pakistan. But still, you know, keeping all of that, you know, really authentic and like, like checking twice, you know, like, does this look right? Does this look right? Yeah, just making sure that anybody who would watch that film, who was from any of those cultures, would be able to watch it and say like, that feels authentic. Because you never want to make something that someone says like that would never happen, or that's not how it looks, or whatever for this, but it makes a good scene, you know?
Yeah, I really appreciated that. I mean, I'm not really part of any of those cultures, but even as someone who's not part of that, I really appreciated how organic that felt. And the other question that I had was just, so most of the time when you're directing something where you don't, or where you didn't write the script, you don't normally have the script writer on set with you. So how was that working with her while on set?
Terrible. I mean, I'm very good friends with Fawzia. I adore her like you can't even imagine. But having her both as the actress and the screenwriter, and she was also a producer, having her on set, I would just be like, just go away from me. You know, like, I don't want to see you for 10 minutes or something, you know? She tried, you know, she would try and improv lines, or she would try to, you know, kind of like change up her dialogue at the last minute, or, you know, offer sort of suggestions for her character's direction, you know, and I had to be, I mean, you know me, I feel like, you know, at the end, I wake up and go to sleep, you know, under the tenets of feminism, you know, but sometimes I had to say to my, you know, to my amazing female, you know, tiny female lead, like, I had to be real tough with her, you know, and just be like, I'm the director, not you, you know? So yeah, that was tough. I mean, I recommend it for all the reasons I mentioned previously, all the sort of like being able to ask her about you know, like authenticity issues, but oh my God, like directing the person who wrote the script is, you know, I don't want to do that again. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I just wanted to ask you a question. It kind of takes us into a different direction, but I just want to ask you if you could share a little bit about your process with working with an editor. Because I'm a director, but I took a class, and I've usually edited my own stuff. So I just want to see what you can share about that process, that collaboration.
Yeah, so probably a lot like you, I used to edit all of my own projects as well, you know, so, you know, I mean, I know how to edit, and I have you know, I have always very specific ideas of like pacing and how I think a scene might like cut together. So my relationship with my editor is, my editors are always very collaborative, and for the most part, aside from this film, I have worked with the same editor for the past 14 years. And so, which is actually really nice. We know each other, and like he knows, you know, for the most part, how I like to shoot and how I might, you know, cut something together. And he and I can, have a really good relationship working back and forth. And, he makes suggestions, but I'm allowed to, like override those suggestions and, no such claims, over ownership of a certain cut sequence. But with Signature Move, I worked with 2 different editors that I had never worked with. And I think that was actually the biggest learning curve, just working with people that I hadn't worked with before. And, sort of figuring out like how much they wanted to do prior to me looking at the cut, how much I actually really appreciate having an editor's input, so for instance, with Signature Move, we actually had 2 different editors, because the first editor, when I would say things to him like, oh gosh, I just feel like the scene isn't working, like, how do we fix it? And he would just say, I don't know, like, what do you want to do? How do you want to recut it? And I was like, no, I'm asking you, like, can we just like talk through this? Like, let's go back to the script. Let's talk through this cut. Let's look at all the takes. Let's figure out how to fix it. And he actually didn't want to do that. He wanted just to sort of push the buttons and move stuff around and not. And so when we changed the editors, it was much more like the way that I usually work, where I would say, oh God, the scene's not working. It feels really lumpy. It's just not convincing. What do we do? And he was like, okay. And then we were like, okay, let's start from scratch, right? You tear the whole thing apart. You go back to the script, you read it, you think about what that scene means in the story. You look at all the takes, we put it back together. We, fiddled with it, getting it down to sort of like, 2 more frames here. Let's take 8 frames out of here. So then you ended up, we pixel locked with the second editor. And yeah, for me, the editing process is, as the director, is really collaborative. I deeply respect what editors do, but at the end of the day, it's also sort of my film. And I want to have the final sort of say over how things come together. Having said that, though, I really love being able to say to an editor, like, this isn't working, how do we fix it? And having them say, like, yeah, okay, let's dig in and fix it together, as opposed to saying, I don't know, what do you want me to do?
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Jay, writer director. I read an article about from your producer Brian, his journey through the film. So I'm trying to like referencing a couple of things on that as well. So you said you were pretty late into kind of like the pre-production, or you were already brought in, the script was already done. What notes did you give to the writers or the story that you had to put in?
Oh gosh, well, that's interesting. I mean, it was an interesting process coming to a project where the script was already written, because I am actually very particular about my own writing style, my own dialogue. If a lot of my shorts are available online, I would, you can look that stuff up, and you might be surprised at how quite different the films that I've written are from this. So it was hard coming to a project that was already written, and I also don't do this kind of broad comedy. So, like I would give the writers the notes just from my own perspective about how I thought maybe the kind of narrative would work. And what would happen is that they would take the notes, and then the script would get like 10 pages longer, and I was like, no, that's not what I meant. And so what sort of happened, which is not ideal, is going into 17 days of production, we had a script at some point, like 5 days before shooting, that was 120 pages long. And that's completely impossible to shoot 120 pages in 17 days, or it would have been impossible for me. So one of the other producers gave the script to me finally, but like 5 days before we were shooting, and said, can you basically cut it down to 80 pages? Which I did, which I don't recommend, but it made for a better, production and sort of at the end of the day, maybe a better story. At some point, Fawzia and Lisa, who are the writers, like I said, there are a bunch of like fantasy sequences and the whole kind of like Pakistani soap opera was like a visual, you know, like we would actually sort of like cut into the soap opera at some point, you know, which was a whole nother drama unto itself. It would have been a whole nother 17 days shooting this Pakistani soap opera that was just something that was on the television.
It was more time rather than budget.
Both. I mean, because the time is the budget, you know. I mean, 8 more days of production could be another $10,000 or something, you know. I mean, that's what the, you know, when you get a certain amount of shooting days, and certain hours in the day, it's all about the, you know, the budget actually. So it was, it was about, you know, being able to shoot something, you know, within those 17 days. But having said that, it was also about like a script that was like, you know, Fawzia and Lisa had never written a feature-length script before. They had written like little shorts, like literally 3-minute comedy web series things. And so when I cut the script down to around 80 pages, it was also just trying to kind of like rein in the story, you know, that for them as writers had sort of gone kind of out of control. But it's delicate, you know. I mean, one of the reasons I like directing the material that I've written is because it's a really hard conversation with between a director and a writer, to say to a writer, like, I don't, you know, I'm not sure about this line or about this story, about this character, you know. I mean, you're talking about someone's creative process, and those are delicate conversations. And, you know, it's much easier to have a hard conversation with myself about my own writing, you know, than it is with someone else. So,
yeah.
And the film that I'm here in Poland with, I wrote, and it was great to kind of return back to, you know, to my own material. I mean, having said that, I would love to you know, to direct someone else's material again, but I would like to get the material, you know, I would like to get an 80-page script, you know, that's finished, as opposed to a 120-page script that needed to get 40 pages cut out of it.
Real quick, so directing Shabana, I don't know if that's how you say it.
Yeah.
So was there much lost in translation as far as you directing her? Did she speak English? Did she understand your direction at all? Was that pretty seamless?
Oh yeah, I mean, she speaks perfect English. I mean, she is, like I said, she's a seasoned actress. She's made, you know, like 200 films or something, and she's made a lot of films in English. I mean, she's made most of her films, she's shot in India, but she has made a handful of films in the States. And the funny part about her was, though, I mean, even this is about like screenwriting. I mean, we would take her the sides in the morning. I would go to her dressing room and take her sides and show them to her, and she would just be like, no. My character would not say that, you know. And I was like, oh, great. You know, like, well, what would your character say? And she would like rewrite her lines. So we would retype her lines and send them to the production office, and they would like reprint the sides for the day, and then we would shoot them. So that was sort of the hardest part working with her, is that she's done so many films, and she really felt like she knew the character of Parveen. And so, and she's so experienced that I felt comfortable letting her, and the lines that she rewrote, it was subtle. It wasn't like she was just rewriting her whole character. And they were always really good suggestions. But she, you know, she needed very little prompting. You know, she's extremely experienced. And I think that, you know, making a film like this, where you have someone like her, you know, who's very, very experienced, acting with like Fawzia, who loves acting, but who has less experience. I think that they both helped, you know, they both sort of helped each other. Like Fawzia allowed kind of freshness. You know, it wasn't just like you say your line, then she says her line, and then, you know, Shabana's experience really raised the bar for Fawzia's, you know, performance as well. And it really, everybody else who was in the film, I mean, Chicago has a really vibrant theater community. So almost all of those actors come from, you know, Steppenwolf, Goodman, Looking Glass. I mean, they all have like really extensive theater experience, and, you know, knew their lines and took direction well. And, you know, that's I love working with non-actors, but also working with really experienced people it goes much faster. But working with Shabana was like just dreamy. I mean, it was extremely intimidating, but it was I learned a lot as a director.
Cool. Last question. I've yet to see your other films, but as a director, like who have directed several films, short films, have you found your signature move as a director?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said, if you look at some of my short films, I think I definitely have a very specific style. I love, a lot of my favorite directors really are coming out of the kind of auteur sensibility, like you can really tell, like, oh, that's a Kelly Reichardt film, or that's a Lynn Ramsey film, or I mean, not that I am or am not a fan of, like somebody like Wes Anderson, but obviously, like, if you see a Wes Anderson film, sort of like, his sort of like style, who he likes to tell stories about, how he likes to write dialogue, like his production design is very specific. So for me, almost all of my films, with like literally the exception of one, have almost primarily been about the experiences of girls and women. I have made lots and lots of films about teenagers and adolescents. I mean, I love the sort of coming of age genre. I write dialogue that's sort of more stylized than naturalistic. Production design and art direction is extremely important, so my color palettes are all very specific. The wardrobe and makeup is very specific. I mean, I consider art direction a form of also storytelling, so, don't discount, wardrobe and art direction to carry aspects of the narrative. I mean, you can tell a lot about a person in real life, about like what they wear, or the books they're reading, or the shoes they have on, or the color of the couch in their house. And so, those are important aspects of character development. So yeah, I think that if you saw even just two of my films back to back, you would say like, yeah, I get it. And it's important to me. I mean, I can see a very clear connection from like the very, very first film that I made to the one that I'm here in Poland cutting right now. But it's taken me a long time to sort of like, yeah, figure out my own signature move, but it's there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Somebody else? Is that a golden opportunity? Nobody else can, what's going on here? No, well. Okay. I think we have a kind of a shy audience here.
That's fine.
You've been going for a little while though. So
you warmed up. You took your jacket off. You're warmed up a little bit. I see.
You got a little warm. I made the mistake of not having layers today. I have a warm jacket and a t-shirt, and it's a big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you so much. It's a fun film, super great.
Yeah.
And I hope everyone had a great time. Let me know. I guess you're waiting for an edit tomorrow from Carol, so let me know how that goes.
Yeah. Oh my God. I was afraid you were going to.
Yeah. Well,
you and I were trying to finish the film too.
I'm sorry, you cut out for all that.
Oh,
so
you and I are trying to finish the film too.
Yes, we are. So let's send me an email. Let me know how that goes. I'd like to hear as soon as possible. So
yeah, and I would say also just remind the people there that there's a ton of my shorts on Vimeo, so they can find those shorts on Vimeo, and that are free and open to the public, so they can check stuff out if they'd like on the Vimeo page.
And if you've been in my classes, you've seen them, because if not all of them, I've showed a couple.
Oh, nice.
And I was going to mention, this is kind of pulling you back in. You thought you were done. And maybe this isn't a question. It's just something I love about your work. And it's what I refer to my students. I talk about micro and macro, and how you could do a micro master where you show the whole scene, but you often start in what I refer to as a micro, where we see these little moments and these little things. You were talking about your production design, and so often, like there's the very short film of the girl on a skateboard. I don't remember her name. That's the name of the film. but where we just see all this stuff and we feel like we know who she is, and then we see her, and that's the film. It's very simple, but it's such a lovely little portrait, you know. And so anyway, it was really.
I would say, like, really quickly, that's a really, you know, just sort of like, even to your film students, you know, it's just like, you know, I think it's really important to know the rules before you break them, obviously. But there's something that I like very much about a kind of reverse establishing shot, you know, that you sort of don't go big and kind of go in, but you kind of go in and come out. And there's this new film I just saw recently that does that really brilliantly. I mean, it's kind of a violent film, so there's like a little bit of just like, be warned about that. The new Lynn Ramsey film, You Were Never Really Here, with Joaquin Phoenix. Oh my gosh, it's like masterful in terms of just showing you never see the whole picture, you know? And I think that for some people probably that can be really frustrating, but I thought it was like really beautiful, especially for a film that's about someone who is dealing with lives. Content of the emotional content of the film lends itself to seeing little bits and never the whole. And you know, and for me, I think because I'm dealing in so many of my films with, just the, you know, the kind of politics of identity, you know, like no one will ever come up to you and say, here's what I'm all about. You know, you have to learn who people are through what they won't tell you verbally, you know? And so I think that a lot of my films are about like being able to look at, you know, figure out who a person is by, you know, looking at the objects that they surround themselves with, you know? But thank you so much, you know, Duane. I will do anything for you, clearly. I mean, I'll wake up at 4 a.m. for you.
No, I mean, just so honored. So thank you so much, and we'll talk soon. Everyone,
great. Thank you.
And
then you and I will talk soon about Forevering.
And have a blast in Poland.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.